Hi, everybody. I thought I'd present what is my journey in discovering whether or not the Earth is flat. I'm from the old school of with NASA and the spherical Earth. And so I've seen so many programs out there on YouTube of the flat Earth, and they seem pretty legit. I've read a little bit, not enough to say I have any expertise in the Book of Enoch and and I have a medical background from years ago. I was a pre-med student, but that didn't work out. So I ended up being an engineer instead. So I kind of have a unique perspective on having a little bit, probably enough to be dangerous, of medical anatomy and stuff like that with engineering to give you my view of this. So I've come up with the flat Earth within the pear-shaped human eye, and that's my research that I've done. So let's get started. Like I said in the intro, this isn't to convey or prove one theory over another, what the geometry of the Earth is, but rather what I found out during my investigation of trying to see whether the Earth was flat or not. And I haven't come to a final conclusion for myself, but I wanted to share what I did find is that the Earth, or at least the magnetosphere that protects the Earth, all seems to be designed after the human eye. So, in my search into discovering whether the Earth was flat or not, of course, you run across the typical stuff, which is the latest from NASA astrophysicist Neil degrasse-tyson, that the Earth is now pear-shaped. And actually, Columbus believed that the Earth was pear-shaped, and he was searching for the stem of the Earth when he was doing his discoveries back in the late 1400s. So I said, was this completely lunacy or what? So I'd rather keep an open mind and see whether, I don't think it'll be this extreme and there's a stem, but see if there's some validity to this. And I'm sure everybody's run into NASA's view of the Earth itself. I've seen the pictures, as I'm sure you have, of the Earth is never quite the same. Over the past years, they've said it's a perfect sphere like this, and then later saying it's an oblate spheroid, which bulges in the center, but it's flattened at the poles of the Earth. And like I said, the latest thing is Neil deGrasse Tyson saying, well, the Earth is now closer to being a pear-shaped Earth. Um, I won't say it's as exaggerated as this, but where it bulges in the center and protrudes towards one part of the Earth itself. And for those of you who subscribe to the belief of the biblical description of the Earth with the firmament, which is shown here. You have the firmament itself above the Earth and Sheol, and with the oceans in the column of the Earth, and the great abyss underneath that. It actually had the waters above the firmament before Noah's flood. This is the classic description of the Earth described in the Bible. Well, even for myself, this actually seemed to have a bit of a similarity to the human eye. And so I wanted to look into that further. Well, here's an actual side view of the human eye, which shows the cornea, which is like the firmament dome. And then you have the iris here to the left and to the right, which is like the landscape of the Earth. The anterior chamber below the cornea, which is like the atmosphere above what is very similar to the flat earth theory and the biblical description of the Bible. And then over here are the ciliary muscles, which are like the columns of the earth, but I'll go into that a little bit later in this presentation. And actually looking at a cutaway view of the side view of the whole eye as opposed to the front part I just showed you in the last slide, it's considered to be a pear-shaped geoid, which is actually what Neil degrasse-Tyson had said that the Earth was shaped like with his last interview, and got quite a bit of criticism, including from myself. But as I started going through my discovery, yet again, like I was saying, it seems to indicate that the Earth, or at least the magnetosphere with the Earth, is a pear-shaped geoid, in fact. And here's a view of one of the latest 3D models, which shows the geoid Earth. It's shown devoid of any water, so without water. And even when you compare the 3D geoid model of the Earth with the side view of the human eye, you notice that it has a deep depression here shown in blue with the bulge here. And that's just like the lens shown here with the cornea bulging to the right side as well. And even when you compare it to another view of the Earth geoid taken from the Pacific Ocean side, here's Hawaii, the western coast of the United States, you have this bulge towards the Arctic pole region with this protruding portion, red being the elevated above the rest of it, blue being sunken below, over here towards the lower left area, this ridge. And then looking at the human eye, with the iris pointing towards the top, if you look at this band over here, it's very similar to the band here, and that's the interior oblique eye muscle. I'll talk more about these 4 other bands of muscle, but very similar to what you see here. And now looking at the Earth's magnetosphere, which is shown here with the bow shock, and also with the Earth right here in the center, and then the bands or lobes of the magnetosphere extending to the back portion. If you look at, again, the side view of the human eye and compare it with the eyeball itself and then the muscles, which extend backwards from the whole magnetosphere and from the Earth itself, very reminiscent of the side view of the eye itself. So when you compare the human anatomy of the eye with the Earth's cosmology and with the magnetosphere, and this is all based on the biblical perspective. So with the bow shock being the cornea, you would have that to the very front, and that would be the firmament dome. And beneath that area behind, directly behind the cornea, would be the anterior chamber, which would be the first heavens or the Earth's atmosphere. Then the iris, that's not too shown well, but I'll show it a bit more later. The iris would be the Earth's landscape or the firmament. The pupil would probably be the Arctic pole, resting on top of the lens, and the apple of God's eye. The lens itself would be the Arctic ice cap, which you would see from a top view being like the North Pole or the Arctic region. The vitreous body, which is shown here in this dark rose color, that would be the abyss or the foundations of the great deep. The ciliary body and muscles, of which the iris is attached to, I'll show that a little bit more in another slide as well. That would be the foundations of the Earth. The sclera, which is the white part of your eye that extends beyond the cornea. So when you look upwards and downwards, that's all the white of your eye. And so from the side view, you see it in this blue. That would be the Antarctic wall for the flat Earth theory. And the optic disc or the blind spot shown here in this pink portion right before the optic nerve and blood vessels, that would be Sheol. And looking at the magnetosphere from the rear section of the Earth, you have here in purple the plasma sheet, and then in between you have the neutral sheet. And the plasma sheet is just like the optic nerve shown here, and the neutral sheet being the blood vessels for the optic nerve. So again, it's just like the human eye. And when the Bible describes the column or the foundations of the Earth, this is reminiscent of the human eye, ciliary body, and muscles shown here as these pink fingers on both sides. This is a cutaway, so it goes all the way around. And here's a diagram of an exploded view of it zoomed in. And you have, in fact, these columns that do support the lens of the eye and the eye itself. And again, from a biblical perspective, but this is also good to see in terms of the eye anatomy. The Bible talks about in Revelation 7:1 that there's angels at the four corners of the earth holding the four winds of the earth. This is an old, I believe, 1892 diagram of the flat earth. It says in Revelation 7:1, after these things I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth. And so with comparing it to the human eye, you have four bands that allow you to rotate your eye upward, downward, or to the left or right. And so these are the four main bundles of the eyes and are reminiscent of the four winds of the earth. And looking at these four rectus muscles that connect towards the back of the eyeball, it is very reminiscent, yet again, this is a side view of the magnetosphere. This little black dot is the Earth shown in there. And if you put the eyeball size to this feature, you have the solar winds of the magnetosphere, just like the rectus muscles of the eye. There's four of them, just like it says the four winds of the Earth, being the four main magnetosphere lobes that direct the solar winds around the Earth. And so the solar winds directed behind the Earth are just like the four rectus muscles that allow your eyes to move up and down, left and right. In other words, northeast, south, and west. And here's another view with the tail lobes that go towards the hind, just like you see with the rectus muscles, and they connect with this sheath there, along with the fountains of the deep. But here I'm just focusing on the windows of heaven. So here you see there's 5 layers to the cornea shown separated here, this being the earth, and underneath the anterior chamber beneath the cornea is the earth's atmosphere. So you have these 5 layers being the epithelium, Bowman's layer, the thicker stroma, Descement's membrane, and the endothelium, which is beneath the lowest layer, directly above the anterior chamber, which would be the Earth's atmosphere. Well, looking at the corneal endothelium, which was that lowest layer in that last slide I showed you, let me see if I can flip that. This one shown in light red. Well, here's a blown up microscopic view of it with hexagonal cells. You find out that it's actually the water pump system that goes into the anterior chamber that makes sure that the stroma does not have too much fluid in it, and it drains out into the anterior chamber, which is representative of the Earth's atmosphere. So it's just a single layer of cells, and it pumps out water from the stroma, that thick layer, into the interior chamber below. When all of the windows of heaven were opened, that meant all of the corneal endothelium cells, which you see here, were open, and all of the water was pumped from the stroma into the interior chamber down to the earth. And when you look up the word eye in the Bible, it's Strong's H5769. It means eye or spring or fountain, shown here. So that's another connection between the human eye and the fountains of the earth and the windows of heaven, I would suggest. But since the cornea of the eye with the 5 layers more represented the magnetosphere of the eye, the magnetosphere, in fact, has 5 layers. Itself has the bow shock, the magnetosheath, the magnetopause, the magnetotail, and the Earth's magnetosphere. So there does seem to be, once again, a one-to-one comparison with the magnetosphere having 5 different layers to the cornea of the eye having 5 different layers, and that being representative of the firmament spoken of in the Bible. And looking at the apple of God's eye in the book of Enoch, which I know is in the Apocrypha, it means the cherished ones. But in the Hebrew, it literally means or says the dark part of the eye, which is the pupil, which is the hole you see in a person's eye that appears black. And in fact, that might represent the earth itself, or the iris might represent the earth. I'm not sure on that part, though. And looking at the heart of the earth, which was spoken of in Matthew chapter 12, verse 40, where it says, "For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." And the vitreous body, which is shown here in the dark rose color, is the heart of the earth, or the abyss. And if you look at more anatomically correct schematics of it, you actually see, in fact, it does look like the heart with the two separate chambers of the heart. Now I'm going to what I think is more interesting, actually, is close-up views of the human eye, and then the related information that I researched and found from other channels, which was pretty intriguing, seen from others. So here's a close-up image schematic of the eye, showing the iris again and the lens underneath it. So I actually feel more like the iris, excuse me, is the earth itself, and then the pupil, or the apple of God's eye, this opening is the polar Arctic region, and then here is the ciliary body and muscles being the foundation of the earth. So here's a zoomed in photo of a human eye showing the cornea on top, which is clear. This land region is actually the iris, and then the opening here in the center is the pupil, and the white part on the outside, or the white part of your eye, is the sclera, and that is reminiscent of the very close representation of the flat earth theory, with the Antarctic wall, the landmass. If you look downward into it, you'll see the white lens behind this pupil that's open, looking like the Arctic pole region, with the firmament dome being the cornea. And here's an illuminated photo of the human eye with a laser, and you see that the iris is in fact somewhat curved, and if you look down, it shows a flat region, but that's actually the lens behind the eye, and the iris is only an opening so that light can transmit all the way through to the back of your retina so that you can see. And here on the right is a highly zoomed in image of the human eye. You see where the white ends and the iris begins, there's a little bit of a rippled ridge, and it slopes upward, and then it slopes back downward, again with the opening of the pupil, that with the lens that sits behind it, but it always shows as being black to the human eye. And then over here to the left is actually the eye of a husky. And interestingly enough, it looks like the polar ice cap of the Arctic region, and the dogs actually are in that region mostly, with the Iditarod dogs and stuff. So for me personally, I think this is just God having a one-to-one correlation with animals in the human or the dog eye. And here's something that I thought was just interesting, but in the movie The Hunger Games, they actually show something that's just almost identical to the flat earth model, or the eye itself, with the circle of the earth, or the iris, and with the firmament dome on top and the pupil in the center. And you see that same ridge that goes up and then slopes downward towards the center, just like I showed you in the last image with the eye right here, with this rough edge sloping upwards and then going back downwards again. And so I was looking at a couple of flat earth videos. This one is the sun and the moon rotate above the earth through electromagnetism, and this is on William Guzman's channel, or Gusman's channel, but it shows a disc just rotating above the earth, this magnetic disc. And another video put out by Ashley Webster, she actually puts out really good demonstration videos to prove her flat earth theory, and this one was the tides and the electromagnetic energy of the sun and moon, similar to the last video where he was showing that the sun and moon rotate above the earth through electromagnetism. But anyways, in Ashley's video, she actually has dyed blue water here with a magnetic core stack of magnets, and here she's trying to prove tides. But I just noticed right away, I took a snapshot of this as it looks like the iris of the eye, and again with the pupil where it slopes down, just like it does with the human eye. And here's a snapshot which I took from her video, and it looks, like I said, like the iris of the eye and the pupil with the sloping down. So let me show you again. With the eye, so it has the pupil opening and it slopes downwards towards the pupil. So I thought that was an interesting experiment. So I'll put a link to her video as well as the other one I just showed. And for me, being an engineer, I always like to see if there's in fact, a one-to-one correlation. So I got the dimensions of the human eye, so they're on this slide and the next. And I wanted to see how it actually compares to those who have presented the flat Earth theory and those measurements taken actually by NASA. I don't think they're totally evil, although there's a bit of deception with them, but I don't think in 100%. But so you have the thickness of the cornea being 0.52 millimeters, the anterior chamber below. They give the radius, the curvature of both the anterior and posterior parts of it, and then they give you the peripheral corneal thickness towards the edge, which is 0.65 millimeters, which would be that of the Antarctic wall for the flat Earth theory. And here's some more dimensions shown here of a side view of the human eye. I won't list all of them, but I wanted to compare it to information that I've seen on the internet and on YouTube with the flat Earth theory, and with the information I presented earlier with the magnetosphere and the Earth. So using this information, I did get one thing from scientific information, which is a bow shock, the distance from the sunward side. So the lowest distance or the shortest distance is 23,860 miles roughly. So that meant that 1 millimeter equated roughly to 6,630 miles, and that was based on the geometry shown here and the information on a bow shot. So with those two pieces of information and the information shown listed here, I went ahead and calculated what those distances would be. So based on the eye dimensions, that would mean that the dome firmament height, and this was given already in scientific literature, that the lowest portion or the hind portion of the bow shock is 23,860 miles up, like I just mentioned. But then the dome firmament thickness would be 3,450 miles thick. The Earth's atmosphere would be 3,050 miles above the Earth's surface, and the Antarctica wall would be 4,310 miles wide or thick. And then the Earth's diameter, based on the iris measurements of the eye, scaling it up using that bow shock factor, it would be 26,520 miles in diameter. And those who want to know the great deep depth, it would be 136,580 miles in depth. And all of this is just based on a one-to-one correlation if you compare it with the dimensions of the human eye. And then comparing those with flat Earth dimensions I've seen out there, the most popular one is the Voliva model, which is shown here to the right, for the flat Earth, and he had a diameter of 24,000 miles. For me, having an average pupil size of 4 millimeters. That equates to 26,520 miles. So I don't think these two numbers are that far off. Mine's a little bit larger in diameter, but what I thought was interesting is that it was pretty close to the precession equinox of the Earth, which is approximately 26,000 years, although the units are different, miles versus years. For me personally, I always think that God does things numerically that catches your eye, so literally. And then looking at the numbers for the anterior chamber, which would be the Earth's atmosphere. This also contains 5 layers for the Earth's atmosphere, which you see here. I won't list them off. And then have it in kilometers, but here in yellow I put the upper edge in yellow, so 4.45 miles, 31 miles for that upper part of the stratosphere, 50 miles for the mesosphere, and so on and so forth. And then the exosphere, they have between 621 to 6,214 miles for that. But so the calculations I got from the human eye would be 3,050 miles of the Earth's atmosphere. So that kind of does fall into the exosphere number. So, but interestingly enough, the Van Allen radiation belt extends to an altitude of about 400 to 6,000 miles. So that's right in that exosphere region. That region puts out so much radiation that I don't think human beings can actually go into the exosphere as they claim. But if you look at the bow shock, the lowest height being 23,860 miles up, the LEO or low Earth orbit satellites are 1,200 miles up, and the GEO or geosynchronous Earth or orbit satellites are at 22,260, 36 miles up. So that's below that bow shock. And with the lowest height of the Van Allen radiation belt being at 400 miles, the International Space Station orbit is at 254 miles up. And then the space shuttle missions have been between 190 and 390 miles up. So these are all below the 400-mile limit for human beings with the Van Allen radiation belt. So I actually believe we do have satellites, and I believe the International Space Station has gone up into orbit, but that is the limitation. So no humans can go above 400 miles, in my opinion, because of the Van Allen radiation belt, and no unmanned space vehicle can go beyond the 23,860 miles because of the bow shock barrier. And you do in fact see the GEO satellites are below that limit. So I personally do not believe that we have sent missions or satellites to Mars or outside of the solar system as some of those that have been launched earlier in the late 60s and early 70s. So I don't believe that's actually feasible. And in my opinion, that's where I do believe NASA is being deceptive. Now, going into the very last part of my presentation, the flat Earth summer and winter model with the sun and moon within the Earth's firmament. You see this a lot, specifically popularized by Rob Skiba. Anyways, I thought I'd take a look at this and see, does this in fact compare with the human eye as well? So let me show you what I have next. So early versions of this was put out by Gleason's Flat Earth Map that was put out in 1892. Here's for the solar solstice, and here's for the winter solstice. So in the the summer solstice, you have the Earth at the Tropic of Cancer, whereas it migrates outward during the seasons to the Tropic of Capricorn for the winter. And this is basically the models that most flat earthers use, and this white area is the sunlight portion of the Earth for the northern hemisphere, and then the southern hemisphere for in the winter, and being summer in the southern hemisphere. But that's pretty much what Rob Skiba has based his information on, and others as well. But there's this great 3D animation video of the flat Earth put out by CBS, and I'll put a link below to a couple of his videos, this one and another one where he goes into detail as how he generates this finite element 3D animation of the flat Earth with the sun going around and illuminating the Earth. But you see that it illuminates a lot larger area. Let me wait till it comes around to this front portion. It illuminates a lot larger area than the Gleason map, which just had this upper portion of the lobe of the illumination rather than this large portion that you see. But in fact, that's what it shows with the human eye. So more so like the video I just showed, instead of the 1892 map of of where the sun is with respect to the flat Earth, the human eye actually is a little bit more extended than just this white region, just like the video shows. It's more like this. So with the left eye, you actually have, if I can grab this, you see that it rotates around, and that's more what you see out there in terms of the flat Earth, and then it migrates out to the Tropic of Capricorn for the winter. But if I delete this off of there, here's the left eye visual area, and here's the right eye visual area shown in white. And so that's more like what the video I just showed you. So for the left eye, it represents the northern hemisphere summer exactly at the Tropic of Cancer on the 21st day, but this shows that it's in 10:30 a.m. Region. And then for the right eye, same thing for the northern hemisphere. It's exactly at the Tropic of Cancer, June 21st, but for the right eye, it's at 1:30 a.m. So they're 9 hours apart in terms of our full stereoscopic vision. And then for the southern hemisphere, for the left eye, that would be the winter, but it would be at the Tropic of Cancer, June 21st, again at 10:30 a.m. So I think that the eye is actually emulating the movement of the sun around the Earth on the flat Earth. In both the human eye visual area, both the left and right eye go out to this 60-degree concentric line, which is just like that of, let me go back up, of that of Gleason's. It's out to 60 degrees here. So I just don't think that's just chance. I just think that's really actually by design. And finally, I'm going to go into the problem areas of the Earth model or design, or not problem areas, but just questions that I have that haven't been answered. And again, if any of you have links or have answers to questions that I don't know, please put those in the comment below. So here's a great model that you see time and time again of the flat Earth with the sun's motion, where it goes from the summertime in the northern hemisphere where the sun is at this blue ring, which is the Tropic of Cancer, then it corkscrews outward to the black ring, which is the equator, and then it goes out to this outer orange ring, which is the Tropic of Capricorn. So here it would be summertime in the southern hemisphere, but wintertime in the northern hemisphere. But my question, so here's one of the issues I have, and maybe some of you might out there be able to answer this. Well, the sun still has to travel around the Earth in one revolution per year, so one revolution in 365 days. So here in the blue ring, it would go around in the 365 days, but out here in the orange ring at the Tropic of Capricorn, it still has to go around this ring in 365 days. So that means it has to travel much faster in order to complete this full circumference in 365 days, as opposed to when it's in the inner blue ring for the 365 days. It wouldn't have to travel quite as far. It's like running runners in a track. On the inner part of the track, you have a shorter distance to run than out here, but it all has to be completed in one revolution or 365 days. But the one thing I will note here, it shows that the height of the sun, at least in this case, is being up 3,000 miles. So that would put it in the exosphere. So again, if the sun is at that elevation, or altitude rather, then that would be in the Van Allen radiation belt. So again, that would prove, even with the flat earth theory, that we probably have not gone to the moon. But where the eye theory deviates from the flat earth theory, the flat earth dome, the earth is positioned horizontally on a flat disk, like you see, but it does look like the shape of the eye. But in reality, if you had the magnetosphere and it was just directly in direct design of the eye, it would be positioned vertically up and down. So with my own theory with that, I think that there may be an issue with that unless the magnetosphere is going from top to bottom and the eye is in the horizontal position. But in fact, if the Earth is a geoid shape instead of a sphere here and not a flat Earth, then it would actually be an eye within an eye. And so that's something that's quite interesting. And I don't think it would be coincidental if that were in fact the true design. And I'm not saying that it is of the Earth with the magnetosphere. However, one thing the flat Earth theory does not explain is the rotation of the pole stars, the north and south pole star. For if you get directly at the equator, and this picture was taken from Ecuador, and this is a photo by Stefan Geossard. So you notice that in the southern hemisphere, shown here on the left side, they rotate clockwise, whereas in the northern hemisphere, the stars rotate counterclockwise around the pole star Polaris. And so that's something I don't think that is easily explained, pole star trails from both of the hemispheres, with just the flat Earth theory. But it is quite endearing to note that the facial features of owls, and they're nocturnal creatures, they actually look just like the skies with the pole stars. And even a 3D global model of the Earth's gravity field has its issues. From the view I showed you earlier, this is like the lens with the cornea to the right, and in another view, where it's positioned over the Pacific Ocean and has this upper ridge that seems to be emulating the inferior oblique eye muscle. But if you look at a rotating view of the Earth's geoid, here's the lens with the cornea to the right again. You see that it's not quite the shape of a human eyeball. It almost looks like an eye looking in different directions. In that case, it was looking towards the right side. Here comes the United States. Here comes the Pacific Ocean with Hawaii. And then there's that lower left upper ridge, again imitating what seems to be the inferior oblique muscle. But then again, if you look at the lens head on, it doesn't quite look like an eye looking directly forward. So there's some issues with the geoid model, but I do think it more closely represents the geometry of the human eye as opposed to the past geometries described by NASA. And lastly, here's a photo of the human eye up close called Flawless by Dimitri, and I cannot even attempt to pronounce his last name, but it's quite beautiful. But anyways, so that concludes my presentation. It's getting late here, so I could tell I was starting to drag with it. It's 3:33 here. But anyways, my interpretation is that the Earth could in fact be flat, and it's Mostly like the iris and with the pupil that leads into the lens behind it representing the polar Arctic pole. Or the Earth could be like the geoid shape I was showing. It seems to indicate that there's a lot of strong indications that the magnetosphere in particular and the Earth itself could both look like the human eye, although the geoid is not quite like the human eye. It almost looks like the human eye looking off into different directions, looking up or to the right in those two cases that I showed, but not entirely like the eye looking in one direction, having a smooth contour. Or it could, in fact, be the geoid eye within the greater eye. And to me, that would show, in fact, intelligent design. I mean, I already believe in the creator. So to me, it is all intelligent design by a creator. But if you have a geoid within a geoid, or even a flat Earth within an eye-shaped configuration, to me, this still shows that there is design of the Earth's magnetosphere and maybe the Earth itself is all both due to intelligent design from a higher being, and for me, that would be God Almighty. And even if you don't share that belief, it does seem to indicate whether flat Earth view or the geoid Earth configuration or geometry that the human eye itself does seem to closely emulate that of either of the Earth's geometries. Anyway, shoot me your comments that you have below on some stuff that I may have missed or you believe that is not correct. And this is just an open minded forum of just bouncing off ideas and stuff, not saying that one particular theory is the correct one over the other. But for me, I do see a correlation myself with the Earth and with the magnetosphere with the human eye. So I think there's intelligent design involved. But anyways, I hope this presentation, it's been a long one. Sorry, it kind of slowed down. It was too fast towards the beginning and slowed down towards the end. Hopefully, it still was understandable. But I hope this spawned some, I guess, ideas as to what may be the actual case for the Earth's geometry. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I will talk to you soon.